Hello, I'm Ali Mustafa with a special edition of Strait Talk from Turkey's presidential complex in Ankara. In this edition, I'll be taking you inside Turkey's corridors of power. Right here behind me is the nerve center of executive power in Turkey. We're at the presidential complex in Ankara, and decisions made inside have a far-reaching impact on not only what happens in Turkey, but the wider region as well. And it's quite a dangerous region if you think about it. You've got wars in Iraq and in Syria, and recent developments in northern Iraq have officials here in Ankara concerned. Why are they concerned? Well, we're talking about the Iranian-backed Shia militia offensive on the city of Talafar, which is in the hands of Daesh. It's a sensitive issue for Ankara, as Ömer Kaplan explains.
This is one of Daesh's last strongholds in Iraq. Talafar lies in a strategic location on the Iraq-Syria border. It was used as a transit route by Daesh towards the Syrian cities of Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. Backed by the US, the Iraqi army is now fighting to take the city back. Daesh overran Talafar back in 2014 and haven't lost their grip until now. Before it had fallen, around 200,000 people lived there, most of them being ethnic Turkmens who are both Shia and Sunni, along with a local Arab population. But after the takeover, only 20,000 people remain. Recently, Iraqi Prime Minister Haidar al-Abadi said that the Iranian-backed Shia militia will also take part in the operation to liberate Talafar, backtracking from his earlier statements where he rejected any involvement of the unit known as Hashd al-Shabi. They are an umbrella military organization composed of almost 40 different militia groups. But Iranian-sponsored Shia militias dominate the unit and are accused of having committed human rights abuses. In 2015, when Tikrit was freed from Daesh by the Iraqi army and the Shia militia, Human Rights Watch reported that the situation became far worse for the Sunni civilians who were at the mercy of the vengeance-seeking militia, and then were subjected to war crimes. Referring to the Hashd al-Shabi, the Human Rights Watch Middle East Director Joe Stork said that Iraqi civilians are being hammered by ISIS and then by pro-government militias in the area they seized from ISIS. Turkey too has voiced opposition, fearing another sectarian clash.
During the operations, they have to be very careful that civilians shouldn't be affected. And after the operation, and the city should be left or handed over to the local people. Local people, I mean the Turkmens. Shia, Sunni, we don't discriminate. And the local people should rule the cities. And actually this is only the way to bring stability to every single city in Iraq.
Iraqi Turkmens are an ethnic minority in Iraq, comprising about 9% of the country's population. Turkey says it feels a sense of responsibility towards the Turkmens due to a shared history and culture. As Iraqi forces continue their aerial bombardment on Daesh targets, the ground operation is set to begin soon. But for the Turkmen of Iraq, fears are growing that after Daesh terrorists are cleared, vengeful militias will take their place. Ömer Kaplan, Strait Talk.
And to discuss this further, I'm joined by Turkey's presidential spokesman, Dr. Ibrahim Kalin. Dr. Kalin, what is Turkey's position on the involvement of Iranian-backed Shia militias taking on Daesh in Talafar?
In Talafar, there is a very delicate situation where when Daesh took control of cities like Mosul and Talafar, Daesh, that is, played to the grievances of the local Sunni people there, who felt for years, especially after the American invasion in 2003, that they were marginalized, they were dispossessed, they were not treated properly or fairly in the general Iraqi political scene, and the sectarian policies of the Maliki government, two Maliki governments. The first one, I think, was reasonably acceptable to most of the Sunnis, but the second Maliki government turned increasingly sectarian and stoked this sectarian feelings. And this is where Daesh, in fact, entered in and played into these fears. Now, we do not want to end up with a situation with this anti-Daesh operations going on in Mosul, in Talafar, and other places, where the policies lead to the very causes that created the conditions for Daesh to arise in the first place.
Given the sensitivities, the Turkish sensitivities around Talafar, is there a red line where Turkey, if it sees such atrocities being committed in Talafar, can intervene more forcefully?
We are hoping that things will not come to that point. But of course, in northern Iraq, let me also underline a very important security threat against Turkey. And the main threat comes from the PKK presence in Kandil and in Sinjar. Of course, we see Daesh as a threat, and we fought against Daesh along our borders in Syria,
and YPG,
which is right across the Turkish border, as well as the YPG, which is an offshoot of the PKK. And we've said all along that these are two terrorist organizations that have to be eliminated from our borders, and because they pose threats not just to us, but to the Iraqi people, to the Syrian people, and to everyone.
President Erdogan recently said that Turkey was prepared to expanding military operations. What did Erdogan mean by expanding military operations, and against who?
As far as Turkey's national security is concerned, the border security is concerned, we will do what is necessary within our power and limit and capacity. Of course, we will coordinate, with the countries in the region, but once it's a matter of national security, Turkey will do what is necessary. Our president is, in fact, laying out a general principle here that when we perceive a threat coming from Syria, Iraq, or any other country, we will do what is necessary.
So what is then a red line for Turkey in northern Syria and northern Iraq? What needs to happen for Turkey to move?
PKK is a Marxist-Leninist organization now supported by the United States. I mean, look at this irony. And these PKK ideologues claim to have the ideology of Marxism, Leninism, socialism, struggle for the people, and all of that. And they're trained in American camps, the most capitalist, most anti-communist, most anti-Marxist, Leninist, country in the world.
But they say that the YPG is the only force capable of taking on Daesh.
Why? Let's question that proposal. YPG is able to fight the fight that it is fighting right now because of the American support. If those thousands of truckloads of weapons and ammunition had gone to another group, say Free Syrian Army or Turkomans or Sunni Syrian Arabs, they will have been the most effective force against Daesh. Now, what will happen? Of course, there is no guarantee that the support that they are providing to YPG will end up with just the defeat of Daesh. It will create other problems. It will have ramifications for the future of Syria. How are we going to keep Syria together?
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this, the ramifications, and let's put the US on the side. You have and President Erdogan recently met the Iranian army chief. Yeah. What are these discussions about? What is being discussed behind closed doors between the Turks, the Iranians, and the Russians?
We talked about the fight against terrorism, Daesh terrorism, PKK terrorism.
In Syria?
In Syria, in Iraq, of course, we talk about that. We talk about Palestine. We talk about common regional challenges. We talked about sectarian relations and tensions. We talked about Yemen.
Any joint operations in the future?
Not immediately, but of course our military mill-to-mill cooperation and dialogue will continue. And our president will be paying a visit to Iran sometime in September because now we have a new government, President Rouhani being sworn in again, and we congratulate him for his second term. And we will pay an official visit to Iran sometime in September so that we renew our commitment to our shared goals in the region.
Dr. Kalin, we've spoken about what's been happening in northern Iraq and Turkey's concerns there, but a lot has happened inside Turkey itself. I'm referring to the thousands of people who have been detained and arrested following last year's coup attempt. Our producer Aisha Jamal breaks down the post-coup reality in Turkey.
1 year after Turkey's coup attempt, the country has undergone a dramatic transformation. In its immediate aftermath, Turkey declared a state of emergency that has since been renewed 4 times. Tens of thousands of people have been dismissed, detained, or arrested. They're accused of being part of the Gulen network or Gulenist cult, which the Turkish government says is a terrorist group. Turkey argues that the measures are necessary to ensure the country's national security. Here's what the post-coup reality looks like. During the past year, more than 100,000 state employees have been dismissed from their jobs, and more than 33,000 have been suspended. All those who were suspended only make up 1% of the total number of state employees. According to the Justice Ministry, nearly 170,000 people have been placed under investigation. So far, about 50,000 have been arrested. They include members of the Army, Police, Judiciary, and Education Ministry. In the judiciary, more than 2,400 people have been arrested, affecting members of the Supreme Court, the Council of State, and the Constitutional Court. But not all those caught up in the post-coup crackdown turned out to be guilty. 43,000 people have been released. The government has also reinstated 34,000 state employees who were previously suspended after they were proven innocent. To address concerns of those who may have been unfairly affected, the Turkish government set up a grievance commission. It will allow those who have been dismissed or arrested to appeal their case. The media has also been caught up in the post-coup restrictions. According to the Directorate of the Press, which is part of the Prime Minister's office, 110 media outlets have been shut down for having links to Gulen. Another 20 outlets were temporarily shut down, but were cleared and allowed to continue reporting. Journalists have also been fired and arrested. According to Reuters, that number is around 160. The Turkish government says they're not just journalists, but criminals with links to terrorism. A number of Turkish opposition leaders, deputies, and lawmakers have also been charged under suspicion of having terrorist links. Critics say the government is trying to silence the opposition, but Ankara says such measures are necessary to re-establish order and security and to cleanse Turkey's institutions from Gulenist infiltration. Turkey has suffered tens of thousands of deaths from terrorism and endured decades of military coups. So is it justified in taking action to prevent such threats from repeating themselves?
50,000 people have been detained or are under arrest. 170,000 people are being investigated for ties to terrorist groups, including the Fethullah Gulen network, which Turkey says is behind or was behind this coup attempt. Do you think Turkey's post-coup measures have been justified?
It's our duty to our nation to make sure that these things do not happen in this country again. Now, you have to take certain measures. If you look at the numbers, some people, especially in Europe and other places, may find them too high, but Turkey is a big country. It's an 80 million people country. And the measures we have taken are not out of proportion if you put it in a comparable context. For example, when the two Germanys united in 1989, East Germany and West Germany, the new German state fired more than 500,000 people from East Germany, more than 500,000 people on the suspicion that they worked for the East German intelligence organization Stasi. And they were treated as potential agents in their own country. They were promised to be reinstated at some point. Those who were expelled from the military, bureaucracy, universities, other places, they were never reinstated. As far as I know, very small number of those people really came back to state institutions.
You're talking about reinstatements. The Turkish government has announced it's reinstated 34,000 state employees in the past year who were investigated and no links were found. Is this a recognition that even in this process mistakes might have been made? To
the contrary, it shows the extent to which the government is willing to go to accommodate these complaints. In fact, we have now an independent commission. Those who have been investigated, who have been either sacked or fired or put on hold, they can go to this independent commission, and which they are now, put in their request and put in their make their case, and they can be reinstated. So it shows that, in fact, there is a legal way, a legal protection for those who have done no harm, who have not been implicated in any of the coup attempts or the Gülenist network.
You and I both know if somebody has been accused who might not be guilty of being a member of a terrorist organization, their lives are affected at a very personal level. Families are disrupted. What impact has this had, in your understanding, on people?
Turkey is safer today than it was a year ago. Politically, human security-wise, economically. If you look at the economic figures, for example, if this coup had happened in another country, in the way it did happen in Turkey, for example, the economy will have collapsed. The whole private sector will have collapsed. Trade volumes and all these things will have gone down the drain. What happened? Turkey has scored 5% growth rate, which is one of the highest in the world at the moment. And now we are in the summer season. The tourism is booming again. Millions of tourists are pouring into Turkey. Foreign investment is coming. Why? Because they see Turkey as a safe place. Some people may claim and may try to paint Turkey as a non-safe or unsafe place, etc. Unfortunately, some of our local politicians, like our opposition leader, makes those statements sometimes, statements like that from time to time to Western media. But the reality is that
he also says that you're using the post-coup reality to crack down on the opposition.
I'll come to that. But the very people whose media outlets publish this kind of stuff, that Turkey is not safe, are vacationing in Turkey and posting pictures, beautiful pictures from Bodrum, Marmaris, Antalya, from the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea on social media and saying that Turkey is great. Come and vacation here. So, this is a great irony. Coming back to your question about using the post-coup reality to crack down on the opposition. The opposition is out there. It's in the parliament. It's on the street. They have their own means. They have their own political parties and organizations. They just held a rally, a long walk from, a couple of weeks ago, from Ankara to Istanbul, and he was not interrupted. If they want to hold, a regular rally, etc.
So it's completely untrue that the opposition is being.
No, of course. They're there. They're out there. As I said, they can protest. They object to the policies. Of course, they should do it. With knowledge, with reason, with wisdom, with conviction.
But then there's also conflation. They also conflate many other issues that opposition. The politicians are arrested, for example.
Well, who are they? For example, those who've been in prison. For example, the former co-chair of HDP party, for example, not because of anything related to the coup, but because of their support for the PKK terrorist organization. And they unfortunately have squandered a historic opportunity by not supporting the initiative that the government launched to resolve the Kurdish issue. Instead, they become a mouthpiece for the PKK. They never condemned a single PKK terrorist organization over the last 4, 5 years, 6 years. There was a hope that HDP will become the channel by which they will separate themselves from the PKK and its terrorist activities. They will become a legitimate political party. They will fight for the rights within the legal framework of the country. Instead, they've chosen to whitewash and justify PKK's murderous policies.
So what makes Turkey then such a target, and the Turkish government such a target for the Western media? In your opinion, why is Turkey then singled out when it is trying to preserve, as you say, its interests and its sovereignty?
I see a growing obsession in the Western media, particularly with President Erdogan. And I see this also among some Western politicians, where they conveniently point or single out President Erdogan to deflect the Western public opinion from the real issues in their own countries to some distant other.
The biggest news story right now are these neo-Nazi so-called alt-right rallies taking place in the United States. Now, the US and Turkey are allies, but let's take a closer look at what's happening in the United States in this report by Courtney Keeley.
Carrying torches and swastikas on banners, the Unite the Right marchers chanted slogans drawn from Nazi ideology like blood and soil and clashed with counter-protesters. Blood would be spilled at a counter-rally the next day after a car plowed into the crowd and killed 32-year-old Heather Heyer and wounded 19 others. Many prominent Republicans called for the car attack to be labeled domestic terrorism.
What we saw when that young man drove the car into a crowd of people, that was domestic terrorism. That was grotesque.
Black belt every day!
President Trump chose to insist over several days that there was a moral equivalency between the white supremacist demonstrators and the counter-demonstrators.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either.
David Duke, the former head of the Ku Klux Klan, tweeted his thanks. Early in his candidacy, Trump made it clear he wouldn't watch his words.
I think the big problem this country has is being politically correct. I've been challenged by so many people, and I don't frankly have time for total political correctness. And to be honest with you, this country doesn't have time either.
During his campaign, he dismissed allegations of misogyny and racism when called out for referring to the former Miss Universe as Miss Piggy and Miss Housekeeping. He denied that he mocked a New York Times reporter's disability.
Written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said.
President Trump's lack of clear condemnation has left many wondering why, when he's so quick to mock, insult, or label, he couldn't do it this time with neo-Nazis. It's plunging his administration into free fall. So many executives resigned from his economic advisory and manufacturing councils that the president disbanded them. Top leaders in his own party and the U.S. military chose a side this week against Trump and his moral ambiguity, leaving the president increasingly isolated. Meanwhile, an impromptu march and vigil for the victims of the violence, candles, not torches, flickered by the thousands along the same path on the University of Virginia campus where white supremacists marched less than a week earlier. Courtney Keeley, Strait Talk.
You're a scholar of Islamic philosophy with a focus on Muslim-Christian relations. What is the lesson that we can learn from the U.S. right now, from Virginia and Charlottesville?
As you have seen, for example, there, the white supremacists, and they are plain racists who claim that, by birthright or by the color of their skin, they are superior to other people, to blacks, to Asians, to Muslims, to Latinos maybe, and other people. And you see this. This is again one of the greatest paradoxes of our age, that you see this rising tide of racism and Islamophobia and xenophobia in some of the wealthiest countries of the world, which are ruled by democracy, which are supposed to hold the principle of multiculturalism, pluralism, and you see this where you have instant communication, you have infinite opportunities to reach out to different people, get to know people, etc. But to the contrary, you have this terrible trend, in some of the most affluent countries in the world.
How do you communicate as Turkey's leadership? How do you communicate this and your reservations about this to the U.S.?
Of course, we try to do it, in through our channels and in different ways. But I think we all have to learn the ethics of coexistence at a time when we have lost the sense of, living with other human beings who are different from us without necessarily creating antagonisms between us. Now, as far as these recent events in the United States are concerned, of course, they are a source of concern. I think it should be a source of concern for all of us, not only for Americans, because it has a trickle effect everywhere else, because it can easily empower similar racist groups and movements in Europe and other places. It has happened, in fact, over the last couple of decades. For example, in certain key European countries, you have elections, and then immediately this anti-immigrant anti-minority political populism becomes very powerful, like in Germany, for example, like in Austria and other places. I mean, plainly racist groups finding a place in the mainstream political and cultural arena in the middle of Europe. You will have thought that Europe had overcome all these issues. No, they keep coming back, and there is more racism in Europe now than any other part of the world, and Europeans have to face this.
Dr. Kalin, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure, sir. For Turkey's leaders, it's quite a complex calculus that goes into policy making when it comes to issues in Turkey, in Iraq, and in Syria. And 1 year ago, Turkish leaders had to make one such decision to send troops into northern Syria. We're talking about Operation Euphrates Shield. It's been 1 year since Turkish troops moved into Jarablus as part of their operation to support the FSA and to remove Daesh from Jarablus. Next week, we'll be bringing you a special coverage on Operation Euphrates Shield, so stay tuned for that. Until then, Hoşça kalın and goodbye.